and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last online event of 2025. I am Kira West, Development Manager in WWF's Corporate Partnership team. And today's a special day. I'm a new face, and this is my first time hosting one of our webinars. And I am thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to share this experience with you where we'll be exploring the world of wild orangutans in Borneo through the eyes and field journal of our colleague Patrick Gemelli. I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the Bidjigal people as the traditional custodians of the land of which I'm calling you from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. And I would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples on the call today. You'll see behind me a beautiful artwork celebrating the snow gum made by Wiradjuri and Gundagura artist Sarah Levitt. And I'm just going to read off a quick quote by Sarah. These trees hold a strong cultural significance in Wiradjuri culture and are a tree that Sarah personally connects with when walking on country. The artwork also shows two animals that call the snow gum their home, the Googabara or Kookaburra and Wombat, otherwise known as Wombat, and shows the importance of the tree for their livelihood and overall well-being. Next, before we get started, I'm just going to go over some housekeeping. So letting you know that we will be recording the session, but your video and sound are not being shared or recorded. So get comfortable, have a cup of tea, or enjoy your lunch. If you have any trouble with hearing or seeing us throughout the webinar, you can reach out via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to help, but if all else fails, we will be sharing the recording of this session to everyone who registered. Lastly, we will have roughly 10 to 15 minutes for questions with Patrick at the end. So feel free to pop your questions in again using that Q&A button. And thank you to everyone who has already sent through their questions. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Patrick. I'm thrilled to introduce you. He is WWF Australia's Threatened Species Manager and has been a panda for almost 5 years now. He kicked things off as a rewilding program ecologist, rolling out projects across Australia, including helping to reintroduce the platypus to the Royal National Park in New South Wales. These days, Patrick's work is more global. He's managing international projects in places like India, Indonesia, China, and Thailand, focusing on iconic species such as tigers and orangutans. Kind of a dream job. Maybe I need to figure out how to get a job like Patrick's. Great. Now, if that background didn't already make you excited enough to grab your virtual passport, get ready for a detailed look into Patrick's field journal. It's packed with real-life stories and insights from his recent trip to Borneo. Through his field notes, you'll peek into the daily lives of orangutans, discover the challenges they face, and see the incredible impact your support is making on the ground. So without further ado, I will hand over to Patrick.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Kira. You flatter me too much, but it is a privilege to work for this organisation. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I am sitting here on unceded Yuin country, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present and emerging in this land. So let's jump into it. I guess the biggest question a lot of the time people ask us when we focus on a species is why that species and why orangutans? And so just to give you a bit of a background, there are 3 species of orangutans. There's the Bornean orangutan, which is only found on the island of Borneo. There's the Sumatran orangutan and the Tapanuli orangutan. And so the Sumatran and Tapanuli orangutans are only found on the island of Sumatra. So they're quite restricted in their range. They were previously found throughout parts of Southeast Asia, even as far as China. they've suffered some declines over the last sort of 50 years or so, including for the Bornean orangutan. They're currently around 104,000 in the wild, and that's a decline of more than 60% in 50 years. Sumatrans only total around 14,000, and the Tapanuli, which was a recently described species in the last decade or so, is estimated to only be around 800. So they're quite low populations. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to focus on them. They also have one of the longest periods between births of any mammal, up to 8 years. And so this makes population recovery quite slow. So they're a large charismatic species. They need our support. They're often referred to as the guardians of the forest. Now, why do we call them that? It's because they disperse seeds through their, through consumption of fruits. They, obviously travel quite far around, so they're eating these fruits. Sometimes these large fruits that other species don't eat, and they're dispersing those seeds throughout the forest. They, engineer their habitat through constructing nests and also by just swinging around. So even that pruning and damaging of habit of trees and stuff helps to sometimes get rid of dead wood, but also sort of open up different areas. And then they also consume abundant insects, which you'll see a little bit later on in the presentation, which helps to sort of promote health of the forests. We would consider them an umbrella species as well. And so when we do work to conserve orangutans, we also support countless, or the survival of countless other organisms that share the same habitat. And they do need quite a significant amount of habitat. They need large areas of intact forest to help them find their food, but also to find shelter and move safely around. And then the forests then that they inhabit are also globally significant carbon stores. So when we protect our orangutans and we focus on their conservation, we're also protecting and helping to save climate and reduce and mitigate climate change. Now, just to focus in on Borneo as well, one of the reasons why Borneo is a focus for us is that while Borneo accounts for just 1% of the world's land mass, it also holds approximately 6% of global biodiversity in its rich tropical forests. They play a key, like I said, they play a key role in mitigating climate change and also securing fresh water for millions of people who live on the island, including for the provision of ecosystem services for about 11 million Borneans, as well as 1 million forest-dwelling indigenous Dayak people. So that's why orangutans are a key focus for WWF. But unfortunately, they all are also facing a number of threats on the island of Borneo. So you can see a few photos on this slide here. Habitat loss, fragmentation, fire, and land conversion. So, for example, we have quite significant deforestation that has occurred previously. That includes the estimated loss of around 61.5% of orangutan habitat in Borneo, which is about 155,000 square kilometers. We've also had significant degradation across around 56% of the remaining habitat, which actually has led to a 20% decrease in the carrying capacity of the forests. And that basically says that, although some of the forests may still be standing, they can't support as many orangutans as they previously used to. Now, the degradation has occurred from things like draining peatland. Now, you might not think it, but peatland and peat swamps and peat swamp forests are actually quite critical habitat for orangutans. And when they were drained for things like, crop production, rice, other sort of production, it actually led to a lot of drying out through the construction of canals. And so this drying, and you can see in that sort of top right-hand corner here, this is actually a peatland that's been drained and dried and significantly degraded. And so when we see that, we see obviously one, the loss of trees, but also the drying out then leads to forest fires. And forest fires, obviously Australians are quite familiar with the impact of fire, but repeated forest fires actually leads to ecosystem change. So we go from that nice, beautiful forest with, lush wetlands underneath it that has a number of food and foraging trees for orangutans to basically almost a wasteland. And so we're looking at habitat loss, obviously from things like mining, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, which basically clear fells everything, but also from oil palm production as well. And so we're seeing that degradation in the top right-hand corner, and then a large amount of clearing. And even though you can see in this picture down the bottom right-hand corner, there's lots of trees there, those trees are all one species, that oil palm monoculture. So it's every one single species. And while orangutans can feed on oil palm occasionally, it doesn't really provide sufficient nutrients for them, and they have to have more of it. But also, it then leads them into conflict with people. Unfortunately, the people working and owning these places don't appreciate orangutans coming in, pulling down some of their oil palm and consuming it. So, unfortunately, this has led to a large threat to orangutans. We also know that the forestry sector in Borneo has been rife with overexploitation, social conflict, and corruption. And this has also led to weak and unclear and inequitable forest governance has been the heart. So it's what's been really driving these threats is that real weak governance and also these unclear land rights. So unfortunately, historically in Indonesia, there's been a number of different departments that have provided the rights to land to different groups, and that has led to a number of overlaps. So where communities might claim a section of forests that they've been, harvesting food from for decades, a private concession holder might come in and actually say, no, well, actually, I've been given rights to that land, and that means then that it makes our conservation, but also enforcement of laws quite difficult when we don't have clear governance there. So, what are we doing at WWF Australia? So, our focus at the moment for WWF Australia is actually in a section of central Kalimantan in Indonesian Borneo called the Katigan Corridor. And so, the Katigan Corridor is this area here, this area of green, which is our core area, that connects two significant areas for orangutans: Sebengar National Park, just down here at the bottom, and Bukit Baka, Bukit Raya National Park up here at the top. And so what our focus is these areas all outside of national parks or protected areas. We want to try, but it is still quite good orangutan habitat. We want to try and protect that. And our work that you'll see over the next few slides is really heavily involved within this corridor, protecting these significant populations. And we do actually have in this Sebengar National Park a population of around about 9,000 orangutans. So unfortunately, 75% of orangutans don't live in protected areas. So outside of these areas and outside of central Kalimantan as well, and into east and west Kalimantan, we need to make sure we're focusing on obviously the protected areas, which have significant portions of populations, but also outside those as well. This landscape here, for example, is about in total, the Sebengar Katigan landscape is about 3 million hectares of forest, and it also includes 1.2 million hectares of carbon-rich peat forest, like I showed you an example of before, which is key habitat for orangutans. That national park down here is about 1 million hectares. The Katigan corridor here is about 980,000 hectares at the core and about 1.3 million hectares in the buffer zone. Unfortunately, it has been facing historical declines or deforestation rates of around about 1.9% per year, but we've actually managed to reduce that down by almost 80% to less than that. I think it's like 0.26 or so percent. Great, I'll move on. So just to I'm going to go over some of the actions that WWF is supporting that you guys are helping to support through your support and your donations. So one of those things that we have been doing is we've been halting illegal logging to stopping destructive projects. And like I said, deforestation has dropped by nearly 80%. So you'll see in the sort of left-hand picture here with our CEO Dermot with Okta, who you'll meet later on, planting a tree. I believe that was in 2013. And so part of what we're trying to achieve here now is to restore some of these cleared and degraded areas. And so part of that is one, obviously planting trees, and we work with the community and the national parks to do that. But also one of the key things that we've been doing is actually constructing these dams here in the canals that we use to drain these peatlands. And what that does then is allows us to back up that water and re-wet all this area to help promote help continue to kickstart the ecosystem in that peatland air forests. But also then the trees that live there actually rely on a lot of these sort of conditional and seasonal flooding that occurs. And so we need to be able to have water back into this landscape. And so we've managed to re-wet around 300,000 hectares over the last decade or so, which is a pretty significant achievement. And that's been around Seven-Yar National Park. One of the other things we've been doing, and you'll see in this section here, is we've been working on ways to help us to understand or predict when deforestation is likely to occur. It's harder to save or harder to replace trees. As everyone knows who's planted a tree, it can take decades for a tree to reach its full size and provide the systems and services that we would expect of a mature tree. So the best thing for us to do, one of the best things for us to do, is to start investing and start looking at how do we predict deforestation. So we've been piloting in this landscape, in the central Kalimantan landscape, an AI program called Forest Foresight. And basically what that does, it uses satellite imagery and AI models to help us to predict when deforestation is likely to occur. So it can be things like, a new road might be constructed in an area, and then we see cars more often. And then so the AI then detects this and says, okay, well, we think this section of that landscape is actually at risk of deforestation. That can then provide information to the local authorities to then go out and start investigating and making sure that, see what's happening on the ground. Rather than trying to fix it once it's been destroyed, we're trying to preserve the intact forest that we already have. Other things that we're trying to do is work with the local community. So like I said earlier, unfortunately, historically, there's been quite a significant amount of conflicting or overlapping land rights. And so where we have a community that might have a claim over a land, but also a private concession, for example, like a logging concession or an oil palm concession, might have also legitimate claims based on the government processes at the time. And that really makes it hard. So, for example, if we wanted to set aside a certain section of, a community forest or a private concession as a high conservation value orangutan habitat, but two different people claim rights over that land, it makes it really difficult for us to then say, okay, we want to protect or make sure the integrity of that piece of land or that section of that land is intact. And so what we've been trying to do is we're trying to develop what we call a conflict resolution mechanism, where we can go to the different stakeholders that have claims to that section of land and say, okay, what are some ways that we can work through to ensure that, one, obviously the private concession holder at the time is not economically disadvantaged, but also the communities still retain access to the land that they've been gathering non-timber forest products or other items from the land for sometimes for decades or centuries. And so it's still in place. We're still working through it, but where we've been piloting it seems to be quite sort of a beneficial outcome for both. So and that involves not just working with the stakeholders, sorry, the concession holders or the community, but also working with the government as well to help us to either realign some of the boundaries there, or also come up with agreements where that piece of land can still be accessed by the community. It can still be set aside as a high conservation value area, and we can leave that intact for orangutans and other wildlife to move through. The other thing we've been doing as well is working, because WWF is a global network. We have offices that work both in Indonesia, Borneo, but also Malaysian Borneo. And so the other thing we've been working to support is that transboundary collaboration to support connectivity. So you'll see the map in the middle here. It's quite detailed, but basically it's showing you different corridors that we've identified that will help to facilitate movement between these fragmented protected areas throughout the island. Some of them do cross the border, so you can see the border is roughly around here. And so we want to make sure that there's collaboration between the Malaysian and the Indonesian sides to help protect these areas, but also to restore them if they need to have any restoration activities put in place. And so that's really key. When we have an island that essentially has three different countries there, if you also include Brunei at the top, we need to make sure that we aren't just working in one area, but also working across the entire island. And that also feeds into some of the other work we've been doing in the Cadogan corridor, is also advocating for the inclusion of key habitat in spatial planning documents. So one of the key ways that we can protect the current intact land area, but also protect the corridor and the functionality of the corridor and connectivity from development, is by including key habitat areas and high conservation values and conservation value areas and corridors in spatial planning documents. Once they're in these spatial planning documents, it makes it really difficult for them to include or so put a road through there, or if they do put a road through there, then they have to include mitigation measures like things like overpasses or underpasses, depending on what's ecologically appropriate in that landscape. So we've been quite successful with that. We've managed to include about 220 kilometres of the Cadogan corridor, orangutan connectivity corridor, in that spatial planning document, as well as a number of different high conservation value areas that are in private concession holder land. Just give me a second to get some water. So that being said, we've had a bit of a taster of the landscape we're working in, the threats that we are facing, and looked at Cadogan Corridor and Borneo as a whole. And I wanted to introduce you also to some of the team from WWF Indonesia that work with me and work with our team on implementing the conservation projects that are targeted at orangutans in Kalimantan. So I'll start off with Sendi or Resendra, and she is an Indigenous Dayak woman, worked for WWF for over 20 years, starting as a field and community officer, but now she manages conservation across the entire Indonesian Borneo landscape.
My name is Rosenda Chandrakasih, and my role in WWF Indonesia is I manage the project in Sebango Katingan for about 18 years. And then now my role is taking care all the program in Kalimantan Island. For me, working for orangutan conservation is really important because orangutan can be only found in Borneo or in Kalimantan Park. So for many of Dayak people in here, orangutan is very important because we learn so much how to make our life from the orangutan, and also the role of orangutan to make sure the forest, tropical forest in Kalimantan still exists. With all the project, we would like to say thank you very much for all of your support. Terima kasih.
Right, yeah, so that was Sendi, who works quite closely on some of the work with me and the team. And so I'd also like to introduce you another key person from WWF Indonesia, Okta Simon, who's a landscape manager for the Semenggau Kadigan program. And he's also an Indigenous Dayak man, worked for WWF for almost 20 years. He's a restoration expert, so particularly focusing on forests and peatlands. So you can see from some of the work that I introduced that Okta is a key person to have involved in this project.
My name is Okta Simon. I'm from the WWF Indonesia, based in Center Kalimantan as a program manager of Sebango Katingan Landscape. As a Dayak people, we live together with the forest and of course the orangutan as one of the species in Borneo Island. So my personal is I have a connected with the forest and of course the orangutan. That's why I need to part of the how to protect the orangutan in the Borneo. Yeah, thank you for your support to us in here. Thank you.
So now that you've met some of the team, I also want to then share with you some of the things that I saw and did when I went to Borneo recently in early October this year. And so it was essentially a trip to see some of the project sites, and we also were fortunate enough as well to see some orangutans, which I'll share with you a little bit later. But on day one, we started off talking about a critical linkage corridor. So this is an area where we've identified that there's a barrier, so there's a road that goes across an area that sort of separates two areas of orangutan habitat. It's just near Semenggau National Park, and it separates orangutans moving out of Semenggau National Park, which you recall I said earlier is about 9,000 orangutans living in that area, and moving northward up into the protected areas of central Kalimantan and central Borneo. And so We've seen, we've heard as well. So we know that there's a number of nests either side. So we know that orangutans are trying to get through there, and they may also be able to cross. We've also seen some videos as well of orangutans walking back and forth across this road, finding it hard and difficult to cross because of the number of traffic that's going there. So one of the things that we're trying to do is look at building an eco bridge or an overpass for orangutans to move safely across, to then allow more functional or more connectivity to allow for better population management, enhanced genetics as well, so improving the overall health of the orangutans, but also then allows us to grow the population. They have safer areas to move into, and like I said, there's about 1 million hectares or so of orangutan habitat in that corridor. Then we know we can help grow that population there. So we started off with Okta giving us a bit of introduction into the corridor again, sort of going over the different steps that need to be taken. Obviously, I understand this is quite an undertaking. We have to obviously understand who owns the land around the corridor area, how much is going to cost, what sort of corridor do we, what sort of overpass do we want to build? And so hence you've got a number of different images here of us with some, obviously the slides there, but also with the team showing some posters at the corridor area. Fortunately, I didn't get a great shot of the actual corridor because it's basically a road going back and forth with some forest either side, but you kind of get the point as well. We also then stopped by and spoke with some of the local community just down here in the bottom about what having a connected area would mean to them, why it's important to have orangutans safely move across. Some of them tell us stories of orangutans being hit by cars. They also showed us about some of the restoration efforts that they have been doing to try and replant some of the trees in some cleared areas to help give better connection and connectivity for the orangutans as they move around. So for them, orangutans are important, like you heard from Okta and from Sendi as Dayak people. It's part of them, it's part of who they are, it's part of their culture, and it's important for them to protect them. And so they really, really want to see this overpass built to allow that safe movement for orangutans in this area. Then we moved on day one, and I just wanted to sort of highlight as well. I know it's not really part of this whole section here, but when we were traveling through to our next site on that day, we also went past some areas where significant mining has occurred. And this was taken, apologies for all these photos, they're all taken from my iPhone 12, but it was taken from the cars driving past, and it really struck me that, this is quite a denuded landscape in some parts. And you can imagine, we saw from that earlier photo the sheer vastness of some of these mining sites. And you can imagine the difficulty for an orangutan to move through this area. Now, we know that orangutans can move on the ground. They're quite capable of that. But when they're down there, it just exposes them to more things that sort of can endanger them, whether it can be human-made or natural things. It's not an area that it's safe for them to move properly through, nor is it an area where they can inhabit because there is basically no trees in this actual mine area. There's no food, no shelter for them, and it's not likely to come back without significant efforts from people to rehabilitate this. Now, when I talk about the deforestation in this area as well, a lot of that is occurring based on unplanned clearing, and that can be basically is another word of saying it can be illegal clearing, so illegal logging, but also illegal clearing for mining as well. So we want to try and help to support the local government to have better enforcement abilities, so like our forest foresight and other ways to ensure that this clearing doesn't happen again. And then obviously we can hopefully then try to restore some of these degraded areas. So I just want to touch on that. So I know it's a bit confronting, that image, but it is a key thing to understand about what's happening in that landscape. Now, so then on our way from seeing the corridor, we then went over on a ferry across the Cutting River to see a rattan processing facility. So most of you would have rattan of some sort of rattan made item within your house, or you've had something that's made from rattan before. It's quite a common material, and Borneo is one of the sort of key areas of rattan production in the world. So one thing that WWF has been doing is trying to work with the local producers and harvesters on developing or so adhering to FSC standards and receiving FSC certification. So this processing facility is actually being supported by WWF. It's owned by the local government, but the organization or the company that now runs out of it leases it off the government. But we've also been supporting them to maintain their certification, achieve their certification, but also then getting the suppliers that supply rattan to the processing facility to also adhere to those FSC certification standards, so that then it all is FSC certified there. You can see it's all come here and being dried. And I think I have a video next that also shows you a bit of if you haven't seen it before, this is how rattan is processed when it's in the factory here. So that, yeah, basically what that is showing you is they're feeding that into the machine. The little vines of rattan is getting fed into the machine, and the outer skin is getting split off, so the fibers inside are separated from it. And the fibers inside are generally what we're using to make, it could be baskets, could be furniture, it could be other items that made from rattan. The skin sometimes is still being used for other things, but we want to get those really tough fibers inside. And then this company then is able to sell this product as FSC certified as well, which allows them to get a premium for their product, knowing that it's adhering to certain standards. And even some places, like, for example, in Europe, won't allow any other rattan unless it's FSC certified. So by helping facilitate FSC certification in this landscape, we're giving them more access to other markets and then increasing the return that they can make, and that flows on then to all the local community. So from the rattan processing facility, we then traveled along and went to a place called Cuppa Ate, and that's a community restoration area in the buffer zone of Sevengour National Park, and it's around about 40 hectares, this restoration site. And this is where the community have been planting trees, as you can see, just to try and bring back that habitat from where it was previously degraded. So this is actually located alongside an old concession. I think it was from oil palm, and so now they're trying to sort of bring back the trees that were previously there prior to clearing for oil palm plantation. So I was lucky enough also to plant my own tree. So I'm quite fortunate. Hopefully it survives. I did give it a good water, and I did actually put more soil on it than it looks in that photo. I didn't just leave it sitting out. But in 10, 20, 30 years, I'll come back and hopefully I'll see this big giant tree there. Hopefully with some orangutans in it, but at least, because it's a community restoration site, they do go there and they do collect the fruit from these trees as well, obviously in a sustainable way. We also had some of our other team members who were there from WWF as well, planting some trees. So it was quite a good experience. Obviously I'm a gardener myself, so I enjoy planting things, but planting something in another country is a first for me. And so I'm looking forward to taking my children back there one day as well. So from there, I don't know, today that day one was actually quite a busy day, but from there we went onto a boat onto the Cadogan River up the top here, and we then jumped onto another smaller boat to go along the canals. And the reason why we're going along the canals is to head into this restoration site. So we talked about earlier that we restored or re-wetted around 300,000 hectares of peatland, and this is one of the sites where we did that. And so as part of that restoration work, we also built this gazebo here, or supported the construction of this gazebo here to help facilitate community meetings. We also had a discussion with some of the community members about the benefits now that they're seeing from these canals being dammed and the peatlands being re-wetted. And they're saying, that obviously there's a reduction in forest fires because, that it's now a flooded peat swamp or peatland. They're not getting as many fires. They're also able to fish more, so they have more access to different areas to put fish traps in to collect some fish. So they're getting another resource from the area as well that they weren't getting for a long time after these peatlands were being degraded. And I do have some photos here as well of some of the restoration areas. So this is a smaller example. I couldn't get it quite in one frame, but we saw an earlier example. This is a smaller example of the dams that are being constructed. And this is basically having people in the water putting, pylons in and different things to allow them to basically, they can lift up or drop down the dam whenever they need it. So if there's a flood, they have a monsoon, a lot of water, they can drop these down, allow the water to flow over and drain out into the ocean. Or if it's drier, they can lift them up and try and hold more water back into these peatlands here. And you can see, there's a lot of flooding here. There's a lot of new trees coming up. And in the area behind here, in the background here, that's what it should look like. So we should see thick, dense forests all through this area, not in the open areas, but they've got lots of new trees in here. And that will, 10 years from now, we should see that forest coming back and we should see some larger trees. But obviously it's a process that takes time, but having the water back in the landscape is one thing. We're preventing those regular fires from changing and damaging the plants that we're trying to put back in. And we're also creating the conditions for restoration to occur. So it's quite a beautiful area there. And this is in the canal Tahang in Tuan. It's quite on the border of Sevengao National Park. So from there, we got into our little canoes or little longboats and headed into Sevengao National Park. Yeah, so we were heading into the Sevengao National Park to where our rest stop was for that night. And that was at a place called the Talali Centre. And it's a community ecotourism lodge, essentially. And you can see it in the background behind me here. And so the community runs that. It provides opportunities for tourists to come in, to go looking for orangutans. I also saw when I was there one night, late at night, we were sitting around having dinner in the darkness and another boat went past. And I was like, what are these people doing? And one of the guides said, oh, no, they're going out looking for reptiles. So if you're into reptiles as well, you can go out there and try and find some at nighttime as well. It's some nice little sort of floating huts or huts on pylons as well. It also facilitates research. So the WWF researchers, the university researchers who are researching orangutans and other wildlife in the forests of Sevengao also stay there. And so it allows us to have a base there, but also for the community to generate income from the restoration of Sevengao National Park. So we're really incentivizing the maintenance and restoration of these key areas for biodiversity, but also for protection and conservation of orangutans. So you can see me, I'm not a selfie person, but I was encouraged to take selfies for this trip. So if I look a bit awkward, I'm sorry, but I'm just a millennial, elder millennial who doesn't take selfies. So that's day one. Now we're in day two, and this is the exciting day for me. I mean, obviously the rest of it was exciting because I was glad to see the different activities that WWF was helping to help support orangutan conservation. But this is the day we're heading out to see orangutans. Now, just to set the scene, we did cheat a little bit. The orangutan researchers employ some local community members to follow the orangutans through the forest. So we did have one of the community members who had been following a mother and her offspring for about 3 days prior to this. So he knew exactly where they were. He was even sleeping out in a hammock underneath the trees where they were resting that night. So he would wake up when they woke up and then start following through the forest. So it was we didn't spend a lot of time looking for them. We knew exactly where they were, but this is our little journey through the sort of flooded peat swamp forest that these orangutans really love and do well in. So here we go. So you can see it's quite over, it's like dense. There's lots of water everywhere, lots of thick trees, but it's perfect for orangutans. While we were there, I had to have some interesting field gear put on, and you'll see why in the next slide. These funky shoes and these long socks they encouraged me to wear. I've never worn them before. I consider myself quite an experienced field researcher, but this is the first time I've worn joggers and long socks like this to go out into the field. There was also some really cool wildlife as well that you could see as we were cruising along, such as the snake you might be able to see in the bottom right-hand corner, but also these long-tailed macaques who were giving us a close watch as we pulled up to the transect site where the orangutans were. It's going to work for me.
Hanya untuk kita memudahkan untuk ini lokasinya di mana brengsek.
Is that what they're doing? Checking the tree to make sure it's not
Untuk nest kan kita lebih ke yang
pushing on it?
bed fly as well. Dan dia nyebar hero sama nasional. Dia observation. Daun, bunga, buah.
Yes, they were really good to see. You know, they weren't that bothered by us, but they were obviously keeping a close eye on us as we pulled up. So we pulled up in our boats, but we still had a bit of like we had to walk for a bit to go and find the orangutans where they were. And so that included walking through these deep pools, and that's why we were wearing our funky shoes and our long socks. They warned me, they said, if you wear your hiking boots, they'll probably get ruined, and I'm glad that I followed their directions. Yeah, and so you would have seen also when I clicked that video that there was a video of these caterpillars as well. And these caterpillars were actually all over the floor of the forest. They were climbing up the trees. If you stood still long enough, they were climbing up you. And I asked some of the local guys, I was like, what are they doing there? And they said that the orangutan, also I didn't get the species name, but this happens seasonally. And the orangutans take advantage of this seasonal abundance, and we're eating them as we were watching them. So they don't look that appetizing to me, but to the orangutans, they're quite. Yeah, so they don't look very appetizing, but you know, for the orangutans, they take advantage of the resources around them. So we arrived at the site. We saw a few times, I was looking through the trees and someone said, oh, look, there's a bit of brown fur there. And I still couldn't see it. But we eventually arrived underneath the tree where the mother and her 4-year-old male offspring were. And I got the binoculars and I looked up, but they actually come quite close down, which I could get some, again, grainy footage with my iPhone 12, but you can hopefully get some good idea of what we were seeing. The orangutan male was especially on his own at that time, but he was picking off caterpillars from the branches and definitely keeping a close eye on us as well. So the reason why we know he was a 4-year-old as well is that when they get to a certain age, they start spending a bit more time and distance away from their mother. And so he was probably about maybe 20 meters or so at this point away from mum, but he was happily just foraging for himself with his caterpillars. So and then keeping a close eye on us. So they are accustomed to seeing people. We don't do anything. We don't do anything invasive. We just literally just follow them along, or the researchers follow them along. But he's accustomed to seeing people. He was a bit wary, a bit, checking us out. But obviously, Mum was not bothered at all by having us nearby. But then after a while, I think he decided that, okay, I need to be next to Mum because Mum's going to make me feel a bit more comfortable and a bit more reassured by this all. And so you might hear, if you listen carefully at the start of the video, you'll hear him call out to his mum, and then he makes his way over to her. And that's pretty normal. We expect orangutans, they spend around about 8 years with their mum. And so even though he might be, feeling confident enough to venture out by himself and be a bit separate from her to forage, he's always got that reassurance that he can go back to her and she's going to look after him. And so that's ended up what she did. And he ended up climbing onto her back and, foraging with her, and she was pulling the trees around. And I just added a little quote in here as well. I think, to me, this is one of the most rewarding things about the job, is to really see these animals in the wild. You develop that connection. You can see the resemblance between us. They are like our cousins, and it really reflects on why it's important to conserve these animals. So that was the sort of the conclusion of my trip. I did spend some time following this in the Palangkaraya office with the WWF Indonesia team to go over some project planning and reviewing with them. And we also reflected on some of the successes and challenges that we've been facing. So just to summarize, we have had some successes. We've re-wetted around 300,000 hectares of peatland in Semenjau National Park. We've included peatland protection and wildlife corridor priorities in district and provincial plans to give them that long-term sustainable protection. We've managed to reduce the deforestation rate in this area by almost 80%. And we know that therefore the orangutan population in Semenjau National Park has been increasing since 2016 and is now almost 9,000 orangutans. But there has been some challenges. So we do have historic and ongoing fragmentation. We're dealing with quite complex land tenure that makes it difficult to sometimes implement our conservation projects and to ensure that they're, the laws are enforced as best they can. As a result, we do have some illegal logging and encroachment occurring. And limited enforcement capability, which is some things we're still trying to address. But we have got hope for the future. We do have that positive signs occurring, and we know that if we continue our work and support the people and the stakeholders in this landscape, that we can have a good future for orangutans. And I just want to end on a thank you video from some of the team there.
With all the project, we would like to say thank you very much for all of your support. Terima kasih.
Yeah, thank you for your support to us in here. Thank you.
Thank you for supporting orangutan, forest, and community in Borneo. Terima kasih.
And this is how you can continue to support orangutans and continue to support WWF.
Thanks, Patrick. That was incredibly insightful. I think I speak for everyone who's attended today, that it's so interesting to learn about orangutans and how they exist in the wild and some of the challenges facing them. I think everybody really enjoyed the videos as well. That was such a unique way to share your experiences. And I also really enjoyed the videos of Sendi and Okta, because I think it also helps us understand, the people in other countries that help WWF live our mission and do this conservation work. So we've had a few questions come through. We'll see how many we can get to. The first one is about orangutan rehabilitation centers. So, are there any orangutan rehabilitation centers in Indonesian Borneo, like the one in Sepalak, Malaysian Borneo? And do we do any orangutan work in Malaysian Borneo?
So yes, so there are some orangutan rehabilitation centres in Indonesian Borneo. I believe there's one called Camp Leakey. I'm not exactly sure the location there. WWF itself aren't involved in orangutan rehabilitation. Our work mainly involves protecting and conserving wild orangutans in their habitat. I think the second part of the question was, it's not to say that these rehabilitation centres aren't worthwhile. It's just not something that for us that we're supporting. And we do work in Malaysian Borneo as well. We have significant work ongoing in Sabah and also Sarawak as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. The next one I think will be really interesting for you to answer. How comfortable are orangutans with human company?
So, I mean, obviously, depending on how much, how many times or how often they've encountered humans. For the ones that we were seeing in that part of Seven-Gao National Park, well, obviously they do have experience with researchers and with people being near them. And generally, we try to employ, behaviors ourselves that are, as not as impactful. We, try and keep quiet. We keep to a small group. We're not moving around. We're not trying to shake trees. We're not climbing things, not making loud noises. And generally, the adults, especially the females, are quite accustomed. Obviously, they know that, they want to climb away and they can go away. They can. We can't follow them. We haven't tried to climb and follow them. And so we're trying to do our best to minimize the impact on the orangutans while also collecting some important data. And obviously, where tourism is involved, tourism at the ecotourism centre at Salali Centre, that obviously then supports ongoing conservation for orangutans. So it's about sort of balancing that out. Obviously we want to make sure that wild orangutans are able to live comfortably and safely, but then also how do we fund things as well. So we strike that balance, I think, quite well.
Yeah, thank you. I think important to remember, even when animals are more gentle or more accustomed, they still are wild, and we want to respect that space. Okay, so here's another one, kind of switching gears. Question on palm oil. What is WWF's stance on palm oil, and is it better to opt for products with sustainable palm oil or to avoid completely? That's a great question.
It is a good question. So we have our view on palm oil, I guess, is that one, it's a key commodity that is used by a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, and it's an economic driver. And so we don't think it's going to go away completely, but we do think that producers should be adhering to sustainable standards. And so that there could be, for example, Malaysia has the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Scheme. And so that's a mandatory requirement for all producers in Malaysia. We think it's great that it's mandatory and great that it's less, but we think it's a bit less stringent than other certification systems like the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil or RSPO. And it's also limited in terms of it's quite inaccessible for small and medium producers as well. And so what we're trying to do in Malaysia particularly is to support those small and medium producers to form co-ops to then get themselves shared certification to allow them to sort of sell and produce palm oil. We also think that it's been widely acknowledged that palm oil is a high yielding crop, and there is room for them to increase the yields through different breeding practices. And so we think that not just us, but we also believe it's widely acknowledged that the existing production area is sufficient to maintain the demand for palm oil, and so we don't need to increase the area of production. And so that's something, I guess, where we're not necessarily conflicting with the Malaysian government or other governments, but we say that we shouldn't be clearing any further areas for palm oil. So to answer your question, you don't need to avoid palm oil, but yeah, look out for the sustainable or the palm oil certification on that as well when you're purchasing your products.
Great answer. Yeah, I think it's always more complex than it seems to be at first. And there are, nations and communities and individual farmers that are affected by all of these systems. And it's a work in progress to do things better, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we've also had a few questions. We have a couple minutes left. We've had a few questions come through ahead of the webinar, so I'll switch to those. Has enough been done to ensure the longevity of orangutans in the wild so far? What more can be done? And this is, I think, the most interesting part of the question. How soon can results be measured?
Yeah, it is a really interesting thing. So I think we've seen positive gains in certain parts of Borneo. And we also acknowledge that it's not across the board. So like we said, we are seeing population growth of orangutans in Seven Yar National Park, but in other areas that might not have had the same level of growth. And so the things that need to still be done, continue to resolve land rights, so land rights disputes to ensure accountability. Like I said, it's hard to enforce things if we have disputes over land. One thing that we want to focus on more is engaging with this private sector as well, to ensure, and helps us support sustainability practices. We want to protect those key corridors across Borneo. So you would have seen that map I highlighted about that Reconnect Borneo or the transboundary collaboration. So we can ensure that they can move safely between habitat areas. And then also developing some sustainable finance mechanisms as well to help fund that conservation work. So rather than relying on governments or donations as well, just solely, we have other ways of incorporating corporate finance, for example, into funding conservation work on ground. Now, how soon can we start measuring that? Well, we can estimate orangutan populations relatively quickly in certain areas. We have developed, the use of AI to detect nests that then we can put into our model to allow us to sort of give an estimate of the orangutan population in that area. So it can happen, but also, considering that Borneo is quite a large island, it's not something that we can measure rapidly. So it'll take, probably a couple of years or so to at least get some good data, but we can make estimations based on what we're seeing in certain places. So I'd love to be able to give you real-time data, and that'd be the dream as a conservation ecologist. But unfortunately, sometimes these things do take time to measure.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. I think more often than not, rather than sometimes, projects are big and it takes a lot of time to make sure that we're gathering quality data. Okay, I think with our last minute here, I'll switch gears with questions. We've had another really interesting one come through. I think we're very careful at WWF not to anthropomorphize wild animals, but with species like orangutans that do have or are more intelligent, let's say, how do you define consciousness of animals like these, and where do orangutans fit?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it is something I think that as we all sort of grapple with in terms of our, our morals, our ethics, and how we sort of treat, species in our world. To me, I guess, defining consciousness is, the ability to, feel pain, feel joy, basically just feeling things. And so, not to say that, I don't think other things are conscious. Like, we can look at a cockroach, for example, walk around and know that thing is conscious. It can feel things as it moves around. And so all life deserves the respect, to be treated with respect as well. And so I think, in terms of higher order or, the ability to sort of have complex feelings and emotions, I think orangutans are right up there. They're no different to our own feelings and emotions, and not to anthropomorphize them, but they also can feel pain. They can feel, love and I guess emotions, connections to their offspring as well. You saw, the orangutan male, calling out for his mum, wanted that reassurance from mum. And so, I think that they are up there, and I think it'd be a real shame for us as a civilization, as a collective, to not make the decisions that would help support the future or a safe future of these animals. You know, we need to sort of work together. We need to sort of find a way that we can collectively help them to exist into the future, not just for us, but for obviously for our you know, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations to come.
Yeah, really well said. And the right that every species has to exist, as you touched on as well. Yeah. All right. I think that leaves it on a really good note. We'll let you go, Patrick. Thank you so much. I'm just going to go ahead and put up our, hold on. I'm going to go ahead and put back up our adopt and donate screen for anyone still on the call today. So for our call of action, wrapping up this webinar, if you enjoyed hearing from Patrick, if you are feeling motivated to support our orangutan work, you can adopt an orangutan symbolically, which make great gifts for the holiday season. So if you're stuck on that, somebody who you never know what to get for them, that could be a good way to go this holiday season. And then, of course, donating, we always really appreciate. So thanks, everyone.